On November 19th, 2023, I was hit with a major allegation by YouTuber HyperCrystal claiming that I groomed someone by the name of Miles Doodles Art. This would take the form of a tweet that had a link to a Google Doc showing messages between me and Miles. This in turn led to my channel getting major backlash, with people calling me a groomer and a pedophile. Over the past several months, I have been completely quiet from the internet, aside from the response doc I had posted. Over time, I have come to the decision to make a final response video about the situation and to shut down these claims. This video will serve to debunk Hyper's claims and that the document he made is very flawed and lacks a lot of evidence. This video will be split into several parts, first starting off with debunking Hyper's document. Before I begin, please do not harass, witch hunt, or bully anyone that is mentioned in this video. That won't help with anything. Some names will also be censored for privacy reasons. Do not go out of your way to find out who said person is. Starting off from the first page of the document, there is already something wrong here. When Hyper first put out his document, the added definition of the word grooming was not there before, and I have a feeling he put that there after my response doc came out. This will be apparent for later, as a tweet he made in response to my document goes in line with this. The next screenshot shows me trying to bait Miles according to HyperCrystal. In all honesty, this is probably the only real thing you can call me out for, but not for the claims Hyper is making by calling me a groomer. In hard times, especially regarding mental health, you don't act like yourself, and sometimes the wrong or little things can set you off. However, this was not me trying to bait whatsoever. This was explained a bit in my response doc, where I said that this was me wanting to leave the internet as I don't like it when people worry about me, that it isn't something people should have in their minds. I do understand how this can be taken as baiting, and this is not an okay thing to do, and I deeply regret saying things like this. I'm going to be skipping the intro part of his document as this isn't exactly important to go over. One thing I will point out is Hyper with his weird behavior claim. That weird behavior was my mental health taking a toll. This wasn't news either, as I had made a community post back in September about my mental health, something I know Miles commented on before he deleted it. Up next is his obsessive tendencies section, where he claims that I am being creepy towards Miles and that I am justifying my actions by saying to him that I am clingy. Yet that's what it is, me being clingy. The screenshots being shown do not fit the definition of being obsessive. There's no signs of jealousy, constant checking, or anything of the sorts. I like to point out that some screenshots only have messages from me and none from Miles, saying that there are random gaps between my messages that don't make sense. This is because Miles deleted every single message he sent to me during this time period, which makes me appear in a worse light than it should be. It makes it appear that I am constantly bothering Miles as if he isn't responding, which is not true. Looking at it now, these messages are a bit weird, but it was not for malicious reasons. This isn't an attempt to justify what I did, but that's what was actually going on. Considering that Miles was one of the few people who did listen to me, I was grateful for it, hence some of the messages being sent. Yes, I do have other friends, but I'm not exactly open to some of them given the environment. I'm not blaming them, but that's how it was. Over time, I did open up to them about my struggles and they have been openly supportive of me. These screenshots do not show any grooming or attempt of grooming at all. The next part is regarding the deadpan responses, and I'm extremely embarrassed looking at these messages I sent. During this conversation, I was going through an anxiety attack as I was jittery and agitated around this time. I'll give as much context as I can behind the screenshots and the messages that were sent. In this screenshot, I was explaining my thought process behind a different issue, with Miles even saying anxiety is a bitch. This also goes into me commenting on the so-called responses. This was around the time where I felt fine for a few days after feeling like garbage for over a month, and it felt like it was just a phase to me. I was not very aware of how mental health worked at the time compared to now. I didn't exactly know of seasonal depression yet. For the third, fourth, and fifth screenshot, these all in sense line up with each other, as at this point I was calling out the deadpan responses, albeit in a hostile manner. Looking back at the first two screenshots, there was a gap in time between messages sent. When I went and looked at my Discord data package, I sent 2 messages around this time, with me seemingly being confused as I was unable to think straight during that time. Miles probably said something I didn't take correctly, hence the hostile messages and later screenshots being sent. Whatever the context is, I'll never know. As again, Miles deleted every single message he sent to me during that time period, which gets rid of possible context and maybe even evidence. It doesn't justify what happened, but context does matter. These screenshots as well do not show any grooming or manipulation at all. There was no goal to be had here, and I was going through a very bad time regarding my anxiety. I am embarrassed for what I said, but there is no sign of grooming or attempt of manipulation here. Miles was okay with me venting, and I still didn't handle it correctly. Sure, you can say this is me being weird, but this was not with malicious intent. I was not thinking straight. The next screenshot shows Hyper highlighting a part of my message, that being, I hate my age, and calling it predatory behavior. This is just blatantly untrue. Saying I hate my age is not predatory behavior in the slightest. This is also explained in my response doc, where I said that this meant that for my age, I have done nothing with my life. When I was growing up, a societal norm got stuck in my head, in which men should never show emotion and should be the ones doing all the hard work. I grew up with this mentality and it's very hard to shake off. I was also not exactly the greatest in school, as I would fail subjects but would eventually pick them up. In turn, I would constantly put myself down and call myself a failure, even to this day, and it ruins me mentally. The same message also shows me pointing out my mental health, which Hyper ignored in the document. This was me talking bad about myself and showing self-hate. Looking over the "he only hung out with minors and solely depended on them" part, this is an assumption, has no evidence, and Hyper has no way of proving this is true, which makes including it pointless. The next part has to do with VCs, with Hyper making multiple claims on how I acted in them. There is one major problem here. He has no evidence of this at all, as the calls were never documented, and I don't recall any of this happening aside from the venting. The VC section also doesn't show any proof of me grooming or manipulating Miles, and it doesn't offer anything but assumptions. It is understandable to not want to talk to people you deem a problem. That is your right to do. Using my age as well is not necessary either. That doesn't prove anything. These next screenshots show Hyper and Miles talking about me in private. As said before, it is understandable to cut people out if you deem them a problem. And still, the calls were never documented, so I have no idea when or if I was being rude or loud in VC. I want to point out what Miles said in the second screenshot, this being, and I want to reassure him that he has someone, but it's like he depends on me. This is not true. I did tell Miles about the struggles I was going through, but that did not mean I was dependent on him. He was fine with me venting and I appreciated him listening. However, I have talked with others about my mental health. He was not the only one. There was never a case where I depended on him. I was just looking for mental support. I had others willing to listen, and I greatly appreciated that as well. The next screenshot shows Hyper confronting me about the issue, although his descriptions of events is mildly ironic as he didn't show his response to my apology, that being this. He was glad to hear that I was getting help, and we didn't really talk at all after that, until 2 weeks later he would DM me saying that he has nothing to do with me anymore, which I will get into. Hyper himself said that he and Miles do not want to interact with me anymore, and so that's exactly what I made happen. I made sure that I couldn't talk to them and that they couldn't talk to me. After he sent that message, I unfriended the both of them, left their servers, and just let it be. I didn't bother them anymore. He claims that I am running away from my problems, when actually I was doing what he wanted. This was not me running away. Another thing is that he DM'd me one final time on Twitter as he couldn't DM me on Discord per his request and left a harsh message. I obliged with the message, but I didn't respond back. After that message, I blocked him on Discord, something he asked me to do. I was not running away. I was doing what he wanted. The next part has to do with a different controversy I got myself into, this being me openly venting in my Discord server. Yes, this did happen, and I am embarrassed for even doing it. However, there are a number of problems that Hyper said here. He says that my server has no actual measures to prevent people under 13 from joining my server, and that there could be underage users in there. For one, it is not the server owner or mod's responsibility to actively seek them out, and doing so may be a breach of privacy. It only becomes my responsibility if there is a reason to believe such a case. There have been cases where I did ban people for being under 13, and that is something I do not tolerate whatsoever. There is also no way of finding out who is under 13, unless they say it or a slip-up happens. It is also the user's responsibility to be truthful about their age when signing up to Discord per their terms of service. In terms of using measures, this again can be a breach of privacy, and doing anything to lock members out unless they say, recite a rule in their own words to gain access isn't always foolproof. Should I have had some sort of measure? Sure, but I'm not required to have one. In response to the dad comment, I have been seeing misinformation that I asked members there to call me dad. This is not true. I never asked for any of that. This was something that I let happen longer than it should have. I made an announcement in my server telling people to not call me things like that anymore and to only refer to me by Odyssey, as I was starting to get uncomfortable about it. I stopped venting in public after Hyper sent this message to me and handled my mental health in private thereafter. To finish off with this conclusion, one action does not equal how a person acts. This is the only time I acted this way, and it was due to my mental health hitting the bottom of the bucket. I did not establish any kind of relationships with people other than being friends, and using my age as a bias is uncalled for. I agree that what I did was not good. However, saying that I am a groomer is untrue. All the screenshots shown do not prove that. It is just out of context screenshots of someone who you can see is having mental health issues that I had to provide the context to. His document lacks a lot of evidence for his claims to stick, and there is no shown proof of me grooming at all. It was just me being mentally unwell. I am still sorry for what I did to Miles, but calling me a groomer is completely false. The definition Hyper used in his document is very vague, and most likely picked that one to fit his claim. He got the definition from a nspcc.uk website, which you can find after scrolling a bit when searching the word grooming on Google. The link itself says, however, that it is for sexual grooming, which puts a hole in his non-sexual claim. His screenshot also cuts off the full section, that being this. Even with showing it all, the definition is still vague. The actual definition of the word is this, being that there is intention of sexual or illegal activities, and that is not present in his document. Hyper even claims that he knows I'm asexual, despite me not telling him up front. He got this from a quote retweet my friend sent, which shows he was also reading those, but didn't address them. He still claims I groomed non-sexually, which is not true. No grooming ever happened. Up next, I want to go over 2 tweets that Hyper made when the allegations first came out. The first one, being tweeted on November 20th, was him calling out my friends, saying that they are stalking both him and Miles, and that they are trying to justify my actions. In my response doc, I said that this is not true, and that they were trying to get into contact with Hyper to discuss his document in private, in hopes of trying to come up with a resolution to the drama. However, Hyper was not very responsive to anyone, and ignored messages my friends sent. I also want to emphasize that I did not tell my friends to do this. They did this on their own accord. The only thing I did was send them the original tweet. Only 2 of my friends attempted to contact Hyper. Screenshots being shown are them trying to talk to Hyper about the document in private. There's no stalking anywhere. It was being severely exaggerated by Hyper. This tweet was made to paint me in a more bad light, and included my friends in something they don't need to be part of. This will be explained more in the next part. For the second tweet, this is his response to my document, which he tweeted on November 22nd. This takes the form of a thread and says that I am misleading people because I said I'm not a groomer, but he claims that I am. He then says that the thread will explain how. The next tweet is him pulling up the definition from his tweet back on the 19th, which on its own does not prove anything. He's just going over what the definition says. He also says that I admitted to manipulating Miles, yet I never said that at all in my response. The only thing I can get where he said that was where I said that I can see how it can be shown as manipulative, which does not in any context show that I admitted to that, because I never did any of the sorts. The next tweet is something I want to talk about. He says that he never claimed that what I did was sexual. While this is true, you cannot say this when using a word like grooming. Grooming is associated with things being sexual, which leads to people also being called a pedophile. You have to specify in the document that it was sexual or not. He did not do this when he first made a document, only in 1 tweet. Another thing to point out is that while he didn't outright say that what I did was sexual, the words he used, such as predator, grooming, and manipulator, allude to him calling me a sexual predator. The added use of minors also gives off more connotation to grooming, thus leading to being called a. To contextualize this, while being asexual, I am also aro-ace, being that I do not have any sexual or romantic feelings towards anyone or anything. I never expressed any feelings other than being friends to Miles. If it wasn't sexual like you claim, then why would you use words like these? The next tweet is just pretty much repeating the first tweet, with the added text that seems to show him being unnecessarily aggressive towards people who don't support him. I am unsure as to why Hyper is referring to himself as a victim, as his document does not in any way reflect him being a victim. The last tweet can be ignored. The thread itself does not show any proof that I am a groomer. There were no other screenshots, no counterpoints, or anything. It was just showing a definition and that's it. Another thing to point out is that he hardly mentions or even addresses anything I said in my document. He mentions nothing about the screenshots themselves, the VCs, the DM he sent me on Twitter, the running away, him twisting my words, and my friends trying to contact him in private. He doesn't address anything besides saying I'm apparently misleading people. It was not a very good response. As said before, only 2 of my friends tried to get into contact with Hyper, one on Twitter and one on Discord. First, I'll start with Twitter. Her name is Luna. Luna was made aware of the document when I posted it in a friend server she and I are in. She tried contacting Hyper on Twitter, saying that she has known me since 2020 and basically talked daily with me, and has never seen any predatory behavior from me. She even states that the document shows no predatory behavior at all, and believes Hyper is just misunderstanding, and would like to talk about it in private. After Luna showed proof that she does know me and even advising Hyper to delete the tweet, she was ignored. It was very apparent that Hyper did see your messages, otherwise this tweet wouldn't have been made. For Discord, his name is Jake. Jake was made aware when I DM'd the tweet on Discord. Jake was a bit more involved with trying to get into contact, as he went into Hyper's server and DM'd some of the server mods that were online at the time. From what he told me, he only DM'd 2 of them. However, they won't be named here and will have their names kept private. He DMs one of the mods asking to get into contact as it has to do with me. The mod says that Hyper isn't up for conversation right now, which on its own is really fishy. This isn't for simple conversation, this is for a major problem. Jake would then move on to DM a second mod after getting nowhere with the first mod, but later decided to not continue with it. Jake also tried to contact Hyper directly with the purpose of wanting to talk about the document, but received no response. It was very likely that he was ignoring people that were associated with me, but when Jake used a throwaway account he had, Hyper responded within minutes as the account wasn't associated with me. He seems to have a bit of a weird priority to who he responded to. It should also be noted that he should have expected some kind of response as he is making an allegation towards me. Afterwards, however, Hyper would ghost the account. Jake also tried contacting Miles, but after again receiving no response, he stopped and left both of their servers. To counteract Hyper's tweet where he's claiming that my friends were stalking the both of them, this isn't true. They want to discuss the document in private. That was it. Hyper was not very cooperative and ignored everything my friends sent. They wanted to come up with some kind of resolution to drop this, but Hyper just wasn't responsive. Before I sent my response doc, I told him to not bother getting into contact anymore, as it would be a waste of time, and left it at that. If there was any kind of stalking or even harassment that happened, they were not from my friends, and I do not condone that behavior whatsoever. Criticism towards his document and claims is not harassment. I do want to say that I am extremely embarrassed of what has happened, and I still take full accountability for my actions. I understand back then and now that what I did was not okay. Even with saying this, I will not accept being called things that I am not, especially without any proof. I am not a groomer, a manipulator, or a pedophile. Hyper's document lacks a lot of evidence and things are out of context. His other tweets on the matter didn't prove anything, and he was uncooperative throughout the entire ordeal. I am still a firm believer that this should have been dealt with in private, and was blown way out of proportion by HyperCrystal. There was no reason for this to go public. Even so, I am still willing to deal with this in a private manner. I am willing to try and find a middle ground to this and to have everything dropped. Things won't exactly go back to normal if this does happen, but it would be better off if this was not mentioned again for either party. However, I will not be reaching out to Hyper. That was tried before and it failed. If he is willing to talk about this in a private and civil manner, he can contact my friend that DM'd him on Twitter and things can happen from there. It should go without saying, if I want to come back to YouTube, that's my decision. If I don't want to, that is also my decision. If people still want to support me, that is their choice. If not, that is also their choice. As much as I want to do YouTube again, it is currently not the best time to do so, and that time may never appear. The only thing I want is for this to be dropped and to have people go about their lives. Only time will tell if that ever happens. I know the steps to take to make sure something like this never happens again, and I am more aware of what goes on, especially in regards to my mental health. I want to reiterate again, do not harass, witch hunt, or bully anyone that was mentioned in this video, and do not go out of your way to find out whose names are kept private. It will not help with anything. Hopefully this will be the last time I have to talk about this.